As a judge, I spent 30 years of my life observing the ugly, predictable geometry of human weakness. Greed, lust, betrayal. They were not chaotic forces, but precise, measurable angles that led, almost inevitably, to a ruin of one's own design. I had seen husbands betray wives for fortunes, wives betray husbands for passion, and business partners destroy each other over inches of territory. I had become an expert in the architecture of collapse, and then I retired. I traded my black robes for gardening gloves, my gavel for pruning shears. I retired to a life of quiet, ordered peace with my husband, Ottavio, a man whose charm was his greatest asset and whose primary flaw, I was beginning to suspect, was the belief that he had none. The house in the country was my sanctuary, a place I had designed myself on a piece of land inherited from my parents. It was a structure of clean lines, glass walls, and intelligent design, a place where every element had a purpose. It was a house that listened. Ottavio had always found my obsession with its integrated systems, the remote-controlled lighting, the automated lock, the climate control that could be managed from my phone, to be a source of mild amusement. He called it my fortress of solitude, never understanding that I hadn't built a fortress. I had built a perfectly calibrated instrument. If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from. The flaw in the design of our marriage became apparent on a Tuesday morning. Ottavio announced, with the casual air of a man ordering coffee, that he needed a week alone. A fishing trip, he called it. He needed to clear his head, to escape the pressures of the city. He would go to the country house, alone. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and insincere. A fishing trip? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. You haven't held a fishing rod in your hand since our son was 10 years old. It's a figure of speech, Eleonora, he said, patting my hand with that infuriating, condescending affection he had perfected over the years. I just need some space, some quiet. I looked at my husband, at the man I had shared a bed with for 3 decades. He was handsome still, with a full head of silver hair and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was a man who had built a successful business on a foundation of handshakes and charisma, and he was a terrible liar. His tells were as subtle and as predictable as a flaw in a legal argument. A slight tightening of the jaw, a tendency to over-explain. The way his gaze would drift just past my shoulder, as if addressing an invisible audience. I saw them all now. I did not argue. I did not plead. I simply smiled my serene, retired judge smile. Of course, my love, I said. You deserve a break. Enjoy the peace and quiet. The moment he left, my quiet, ordered peace was replaced by a cold, familiar clarity. I was no longer a wife. I was an investigator. The case of Eleonora versus Ottavio had officially been opened. I did not resort to the crude, emotional tactics of a jealous spouse. I did not install a tracker on his car or hack into his email. My methods were more refined. I made a single phone call to a man named Marcus, a private investigator I had used occasionally in my professional life, a man whose discretion was as absolute as his efficiency. Marcus, I said, I have a small domestic matter. My husband, Ottavio, is on a solo fishing trip at our country estate. I would like to know if he is, in fact, alone. The confirmation came less than 24 hours later. It arrived in the form of a single encrypted email. The text was brief. Subject is not alone. He is accompanied by a female companion. Name, Vanessa Almada, age 28, an employee at his firm. I have attached photographic evidence. If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from. I opened the attachment. The photos were taken with a long-range lens, grainy but undeniable. There was Ottavio unloading groceries from his car. And there was Vanessa, a young, ambitious-looking woman with long, dark hair, laughing, her hand resting familiarly on his arm. They were at my house, my sanctuary, the place I had built with my own hands, on the land my parents had left me. The emotion that rose in me was not the hot, messy grief of a heartbroken wife. It was the cold, precise fury of a strategist whose territory had been invaded. He had not just betrayed our marriage, he had profaned my home. He had mistaken my quiet retirement for weakness, my trust for naivete. He had, in short, made a fatal miscalculation. He had forgotten who I was. I was not just a wife, I was a judge, and judgment was coming. I did not cry, I did not throw things. I went to my study, and I opened the schematics for the country house. I looked at the intricate wiring diagrams, at the network of sensors and cameras I had insisted insisted on installing, the systems Ottavio had always dismissed as my frescuras, my little follies. He thought he had taken his mistress to a secluded love nest. He had, in fact, walked her into a cage of my own design. I packed a small overnight bag. I retrieved the spare, unlisted key to the guest house on the property, a small, forgotten cottage at the edge of the woods that was not connected to the main house's systems. My plan was not to confront him. Confrontation was messy, emotional, unpredictable. My plan was to dismantle him, his affair, his business, his life. I would use the very sanctuary he had chosen to defile as my instrument. The geometry of his downfall would be as precise and as elegant as the architecture of the house itself. The game, as they say, was afoot, and I was no longer an observer. I was a player. The drive to the country was a study in cold, controlled fury. I did not speed. I did not play angry music. I simply drove, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind a whirring engine of calculation. Every mile that passed, every familiar landmark, was a fresh wave of indignation. This was my territory, my home, and it was being occupied by hostile forces. I arrived just after dusk, parking my car in a hidden alcove a quarter of a mile down the road, a spot I knew was invisible from the main house. I walked the rest of the way through the woods, the crunch of dry leaves under my boots, the only sound in the twilight stillness. The air was crisp, clean, and carried the scent of pine and damp earth. It was a scent I had always associated with peace. Tonight, it smelled of war. The guest house was exactly as I had left it, small, dusty, and forgotten. It was a simple one-room cottage with a small kitchenette and a bathroom, a relic from my parents' time. Its only modern convenience was a dedicated, high-speed internet line I had installed years ago, a private connection separate from the main house for the rare occasions I needed to work from the country without interruption. It was now to be my command center. I unpacked my small bag, a change of clothes, a laptop, a burner phone, and a thermos of strong black coffee. From my laptop, I accessed the home's security system. Ottavio, in his arrogance, had never bothered to change the default password, a rookie mistake. The screen lit up with a dozen different camera angles. There they were, my husband and his paramour, playing house in my home. They were in the kitchen, the one I had designed with its custom soapstone countertops and Italian gas range. Vanessa was attempting to cook, laughing as she ineptly chopped an onion. Ottavio was leaning against the counter, a glass of my best single malt scotch in his hand, watching her with the smug, proprietary look of a man who believes he has gotten away with something. They looked comfortable, entitled. It was nauseating. I spent the first night simply observing. I watched them eat the dinner she had prepared, a meal that was, from the looks of it, mediocre at best. I watched them watch a movie on the large-screen television in the living room, their bodies curled together on the sofa I had chosen. I watched them retire to my bedroom, to my bed. The rage that simmered in me was a clean, pure flame. It did not cloud my judgment. It sharpened it. I was not just a scorned wife. I was a judge with a front-row seat to the presentation of evidence, and the evidence was damning. If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from. The next day, my campaign began. It was not a frontal assault. It was a campaign of psychological erosion, a series of small, inexplicable events designed to fray their nerves, to turn their romantic getaway into a slow-burn horror movie. It started subtly. As they were having breakfast on the veranda, I used my phone to activate the sprinkler system on the far side of the lawn, a minor, easily dismissed annoyance. Later, as Vanessa was sunbathing by the pool, I made the robotic pool cleaner come to life, its whirring, relentless patrol of the water just intrusive enough to be unsettling. Ottavio, I knew, would blame the temperamental smart home system. He had always been dismissive of my technological toys, viewing them as overly complex and unnecessary. His ignorance was now my greatest weapon. That night, as they sat down to dinner, I began to escalate. I dimmed the dining room lights, then brought them back up, then made them flicker, a subtle, ghostly pulse. From the high-end Sonos speakers I had so carefully installed throughout the house, I began to play music. Not loud, angry music, but a single, melancholy piano piece by Satie, the same piece that had been played at my father's funeral. I played it at a barely audible volume, a phantom melody that would drift in and out of their consciousness, a musical ghost in the machine. I watched them on the cameras. Vanessa looked unnerved. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her head tilted. "Hear what?" Ottavio replied, already on his second glass of wine. "It's just the house making noises. It's an old house. It doesn't feel old," she said, her voice small. It feels watched. A small, cold smile touched my lip. Good, I whispered to the screen. It is. The true performance began after they went to bed. I waited until the camera feed from the bedroom showed they were asleep. Then, I went to work. I used the remote access to unlock the front door. I made the lights in the downstairs hallway flicker on and off in a slow, rhythmic pattern. And from the speaker in the living room, I played a new sound, the soft, distinct sound of a child's laughter, a sound clip I had taken from an old home video of our son. I watched as Ottavio and Vanessa were startled awake. "What was that?" she whispered, clutching his arm. "It was nothing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction, probably just the wind. He got out of bed and went downstairs to investigate. I watched him on the cameras as he walked through the house, checking the locks, peering out the windows. He found the front door unlocked, a detail that clearly unsettled him. He relocked it, his movements now tense and jerky. He returned to the bedroom, his bravado gone. "Everything's fine," he told. "Just the door. I must have forgotten to lock it." But I knew he wasn't fine. I could see the fear in his eyes, the dawning realization that they were in a remote, isolated house, and that they were not, perhaps, entirely alone. I let them fall back into a restless sleep, and then, just before dawn, I delivered the masterstroke. I accessed the smart television in their bedroom, and on the screen, in large, simple block letters, I typed a single, two-word message: "I know." I then turned off all the cameras and went to bed, a feeling of deep, satisfying peace settling over me. The geometry of their downfall was taking shape. The lines were being drawn, and they were trapped inside them. The message on the television screen was the fulcrum upon which their romantic getaway began to pivot into a psychological nightmare. I did not turn the cameras back on immediately. I allowed them to marinate in their fear, to wake up to that stark digital accusation and grapple with its implications in the harsh light of morning. I could imagine the scene, the panicked whispers, the frantic search for a rational explanation, the slow, creeping poison of paranoia seeping into the foundations of their illicit weekend. I spent the morning in my guest house, my command center, reviewing the case files I had requested from my investigator, Marcus. I was no longer just interested in the emotional dimensions of Ottavio's betrayal. I was interested in the financial one. As a judge, I knew that infidelity was rarely a purely emotional crime. It was often accompanied by a host of other, more tangible transgressions, and I was determined to uncover them all. The files were a testament to Ottavio's arrogance. He had been careless. There were credit card statements detailing lavish gifts, designer handbags, expensive jewelry, weekend trips to boutique hotels. All of it, I noted with a cold fury, had been charged to a corporate credit card. He had been using company funds from the business he had built with his partner, Julio, to finance his affair. This was not just adultery. This was embezzlement. A new, far more serious charge had just been added to the indictment. Around noon, I reactivated the cameras. The atmosphere in the main house was thick with a tense, brittle silence. Vanessa was chain-smoking on the veranda, her face pale and drawn. Ottavio was pacing the living room, his phone pressed to his ear. I zoomed in, activating the audio sensors. He was talking to the local security company. "No, I'm telling you, someone was in the house," he was saying, his voice a mixture of anger and panic. "The door was unlocked. There was a message on the TV. I want you to send someone out here. Now." I listened as the security dispatcher calmly explained that a remote diagnostic of the system showed no signs of a breach. There were no alarms triggered, no sensors tripped. As far as they were concerned, the system was functioning perfectly. "It's probably just a glitch, sir," the dispatcher said, his tone bored and dismissive. "Have you tried rebooting the system?" Ottavio slammed the phone down in frustration. He was trapped. He couldn't tell the security company the full story without revealing his own transgression. He was a man being haunted, and he couldn't even report the crime. Vanessa came back inside, her eyes wide with fear. "What did they say?" "They're useless," he snapped. "They think I'm crazy. Maybe we should just leave, Ottavio," she said, her voice trembling. "This place, it's wrong. I don't feel safe here." "Don't be ridiculous," he said, his bravado returning. "We're not going to be scared away by a power surge and a TV glitch. I'll figure it out." But the cracks were appearing. The foundation of their perfect secret world was beginning to crumble. That afternoon, I decided to escalate. My campaign moved from the psychological to the physical. They decided to go for a swim. As they were in the pool, I waited for them to leave their phones on a lounge chair. Then, I activated the high-powered Wi-Fi jammer I had brought with me. Their connection to the outside world, their cell service, their internet was severed. At the same time, I remotely triggered the automatic cover for the pool. The heavy vinyl sheet began to slide slowly, inexorably across the surface of the water, a dark shadow closing in on them. The panic was immediate. They swam frantically to the edge, pulling themselves out just before the cover sealed completely. They were wet, shivering, and now completely cut off. "What the hell was that?" Vanessa shrieked. Ottavio grabbed his phone. "No service," he said, his voice tight with a dawning horror. Nothing. They were now truly isolated, trapped in my beautiful, intelligent house, with no way to call for help, no way to escape. The sanctuary had officially become a prison. They spent the rest of the afternoon trying to find a way to restore their connection, their frustration mounting with every failed attempt. The house, which had seemed so luxurious and welcoming just a day before, was now a source of deep, unsettling hostility. The smart home features Ottavio had once mocked were now a labyrinth of technological malevolence. As evening fell, a new, more primal fear began to set in, the fear of the dark. The house was in a remote wooded area, miles from the nearest neighbor. The darkness here was absolute, a thick, inky blackness that seemed to press in on the glass walls of the house. And I, the unseen guest, was about to become the master of that darkness. I waited until they were huddled together in the living room, the last of the daylight fading, and then, with a single satisfying tap on my phone, I cut the power. The entire house was plunged into a sudden, shocking blackness. The silence that followed was broken only by Vanessa's terrified scream. The geometry of their fear was perfect. They were isolated, disconnected, and now completely blind. The board was set. The pieces were in place. And the checkmate was coming, com certeza. Aqui estão os capítulos restantes de A Geometria da Vingança, continuando a história de onde paramos, em inglês, com a profundidade e o comprimento solicitados. Darkness in the country is a different entity than in the city. It's not merely the absence of light, it's a presence, a heavy sound-absorbing blanket that erases the world. When I cut the power, I plunged them not just into blackness, but into a primal, disorienting void. Vanessa's scream, sharp and immediate, was a satisfying, percussive start to the next phase of my campaign. I watched them on the night vision cameras, two frantic, stumbling figures in a world they no longer controlled. "It's just a power outage." Ottavio's voice was a strained whisper, trying to project a calm he clearly did not feel. I could see him fumbling for his phone, its screen a useless, dead slate. The Wi-Fi jammer was still active. They were an island. From the comfort of my guest house, I became a god, a malevolent deity, pulling the strings of their small, terrified universe. I let them stumble in the dark for a full hour, their whispers escalating into panicked, accusatory hisses. The adrenaline of it all was a clean, cold fire in my veins. This was not the messy, emotional chaos of a scorned wife. This was the precise, calculated execution of a sentence. Then I began to orchestrate the haunting. My house was designed with its own backup generator, a detail Ottavio had always found needlessly extravagant. With a tap on my laptop, I brought it to life. But I did not restore full power. I brought up only select, strategic lights, a single spotlight on a stark, modernist painting in the hallway, a low, under-cabinet light in the kitchen, casting long, dancing shadows, the dim, emergency lights along the floor, creating eerie pathways that led nowhere. I was not giving them light. I was giving them a stage set for a horror film. I watched them creep out of the living room, their bodies silhouetted against the strange, theatrical lighting. They looked small, vulnerable. Good. Next, the sound. The Sonos system was also on the backup generator. I didn't play the child's laughter again. That was a tool for a specific kind of terror. Tonight required something more intimate, more personal. I queued up the song from our wedding. Not the upbeat recessional, but the slow, melancholic piece I had walked down the aisle to, a piece by Eric Satie that had always made Ottavio cry. The melody drifted through the house, spectral and haunting, seeming to come from the walls themselves. I watched Vanessa still mid-step, a shiver running down her spine. "What is that?" she whispered. Ottavio's face tightened. The music was a key to a memory that was exclusively ours, a memory he was now sharing with another woman in my house. The guilt was written all over him. "It's nothing," he lied, his voice hoarse. "It's a smart speaker. It must be a glitch." "A glitch that plays wedding music in the middle of a power outage?" she shot back, her voice rising with hysteria. "Your phone doesn't work, the lights are possessed, and the house is playing love songs. I want to leave, Ottavio." "And go where?" he retorted, his frustration finally boiling over into anger. "Walk? We have no service. We can't even call a cab. We are stuck here until the power comes back on." The night stretched on, an eternity of whispered arguments and tense, frightened silences. Each creak of the house, each rustle of leaves outside, became a source of fresh terror for them. They were no longer lovers on a secret tryst. They were two prisoners, trapped in a cell of their own making, and the warden was an invisible, malevolent force they could not comprehend. My final move of the night was one of pure, psychological cruelty. The smart home system controlled the heating. From my laptop, I began to slowly, incrementally, lower the temperature in the main house. 1 degree every 15 minutes. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible change, but over the course of the next 2 hours, the house grew cold, a deep, penetrating chill that seeped into their bones. I watched them huddle together under a blanket on the sofa, not for warmth of affection, but for the simple, primal need for shared body heat. They were shivering, miserable, their romantic getaway having devolved into a grim, joyless survival exercise. What had once been a love nest was now a labyrinth of shadows, paranoia, and regret. And I, its architect, sat in my warm, quiet guest house, sipping my coffee and designing the next, even more exquisite, phase of their torment. Morning arrived, not with the gentle golden light of the countryside, but with a cold gray drizzle that seemed to seep through the glass walls of the main house. I had restored the power an hour before dawn, but the psychological damage was done. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a hostile entity, its every convenience now a potential weapon. I remained in my guest house command center, monitoring their movements through the security cameras. Sleep had clearly eluded them. Ottavio's face was a mask of grim exhaustion, the charming, confident businessman replaced by a tired, irritable man on the edge of his patience. Vanessa looked even worse. Her face was pale and blotchy from crying, her usual glamorous confidence completely gone. She looked like a frightened child who just wanted to go home. I allowed them a brief respite, a semblance of normalcy. The coffee maker worked. The water for their showers was hot, but the illusion of control was just that, an illusion. I was simply setting the stage for the day's psychological warfare. Their first argument of the day began over breakfast. I listened, a silent observer, as Vanessa pleaded with Ottavio to just leave. "I can't, Vanessa," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "My car is here, all my things. We can't just abandon the house. What would I tell Eleonora?" "Tell her the truth," she cried. "Or tell her a lie. I don't care. I just want to get out of this creepy, haunted house. Something is wrong here, Ottavio. That message on the TV, the music, the cold. Someone is messing with us." "No one is messing with us," he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's a complicated system. It's glitchy. My wife, Eleonora, she insisted on all this ridiculous technology. It's always been more trouble than it's worth." He was blaming me, blaming my design. It was a pathetic attempt to reassert his control, to find a rational explanation for the inexplicable. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. His ignorance was still my greatest ally. I let their argument simmer. Then, I made my next move. A courier van pulled up the long driveway. A man in a uniform walked to the front door and rang the bell. Ottavio answered, a look of confusion on his face. The courier handed him a large, beautifully wrapped gift box. "I didn't order anything," Ottavio said. "The delivery instructions just said to bring it here," the courier replied with a shrug, and left. I watched as Ottavio and Vanessa stared at the box as if it were a bomb. It was, a psychological one. "Who is it from?" Vanessa asked, her voice a whisper. "There's no card," Ottavio said. He carefully untied the silk ribbon and opened the box. Inside, nestled in a bed of black tissue paper, was a single, exquisite, hand-blown crystal wine glass. It was engraved with a single, elegant initial, E. It was one of a pair I had given him for our 25th wedding anniversary. The other one was in my hand, in the guest house, as I watched their reaction. Vanessa recoiled as if she had been burned. "E," she whispered. "Eleonora?" "It can't be," Ottavio said, his face ashen. "She's in the city. She thinks I'm on a fishing trip." "Does she?" Vanessa's voice was sharp, accusatory. "Or is this her? Is she the one doing all of this? Is she watching us?" "That's insane," he scoffed, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The cracks in their illicit fantasy were widening into a chasm. He, the master of deceit, was now confronted with a deception he couldn't comprehend. The paranoia that had been a subtle undercurrent was now a raging river, and it was beginning to sweep them apart. They spent the rest of the day in a state of agitated paralysis. They were too afraid to stay, but had no way to leave. Ottavio's attempts to fix the non-existent problems with the house only increased his frustration. Vanessa followed him from room to room, a nervous shadow, her eyes constantly darting towards the windows, as if expecting to see a face peering in. The house was no longer their love nest. It was my chessboard, and they were my pawns, trapped by their own guilt, moving exactly where I wanted them to. The game was far from over, But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The days that followed were a crescendo of calculated sabotage, each small, inexplicable event a carefully placed blow in an invisible war that Ottavio and Vanessa were only just beginning to understand. I watched, with the cold, detached precision of a surgeon, as their shared fantasy of a romantic escape cracked and splintered under the relentless pressure of suspicion and paranoia. Phone calls would suddenly drop mid-sentence. Text messages would fail to send. Their digital lifelines to the outside world were severed at my command, plunging them deeper into their shared isolation. Vanessa, who had arrived so full of confident, youthful arrogance, now moved through the house like a ghost, starting at every shadow, her conversations with Ottavio threaded with a growing needle of fear. Ottavio tried to maintain a facade of calm, but his increasingly frantic calls to the tech support line for the smart home system were tinged with an undercurrent of barely controlled panic. "No! It's not a user error," I heard him yell into his dead phone. "Your system is compromised." He was a man shouting into the void, and the void was me. In the quiet solitude of my guest house, I strategized my next moves like a general planning a siege. One evening, as they were trying to have a romantic dinner by the fireplace, I used the home automation system to trigger the smoke alarms. The shrill, piercing siren shattered the silence, filling the house with a sense of urgent, nameless dread. They ran outside, coughing and panicked, only to find the house perfectly calm, the air clear. When they went back inside, the alarms had stopped, and a single childish toy, a small yellow rubber duck from our grandchildren's last visit, was floating in the center of the indoor swimming pool. Vanessa's scream pierced the night air. I allowed myself a faint, satisfied smile. My house had become a haunted monument to their betrayal. I intercepted their fraying conversations, listening with a detached fascination as the seeds of doubt I had planted began to bear fruit. The blame shifted from the glitchy house to each other. "Did you tell anyone we were coming here?" Ottavio demanded one night, his voice a harsh whisper. "Of course not," she hissed back. "Did you? Maybe one of your buddies is playing a sick joke." "Or maybe," he retorted, his voice dripping with a new, ugly suspicion, "this has something to do with you. Maybe there's someone you didn't want to know about us." Their affair, which had been their shared, thrilling secret, was now a source of mutual suspicion. The intimacy they had sought was curdling into a toxic paranoia. They were trapped in a beautiful glass house, and they were beginning to throw stones at each other. One night, after a particularly heated quarrel in which Ottavio accused her of being hysterical, he stormed out of the living room to sleep on the sofa in his study. I watched on the cameras as Vanessa sat alone, the fire dying in the hearth, her face streaked with tears. She wrapped her arms around herself, a small, lonely figure in the vast, hostile house. "Who is she?" she whispered to the empty room. "Who is watching us?" The house wasn't just watching, it was punishing, and I was the architect of its wrath. The geometry of my revenge was nearing its elegant, inevitable conclusion. I was not just destroying their affair, I was making them destroy it themselves. I was showing them that the ugliest secrets are not the ones we keep from others, but the ones we keep from ourselves. The flaw, I knew, was not just in my marriage, it was in my husband's character, and I was about to expose it, not just to myself, but to the world. By the fifth day, the psychological siege had reached its intended crescendo. The atmosphere inside the main house was no longer one of fear. It was one of pure, unadulterated terror. Watching from my hidden refuge, I could see that any semblance of control had completely evaporated. Vanessa had stopped pretending at ease. She paced the rooms like a caged animal, her every glance over her shoulder a silent scream. Ottavio's blustering bravado had been reduced to endangered whispers, his frustration flaring in sudden, violent bursts of anger directed at inanimate objects. A chair he kicked, a glass he slammed down on the counter. Their romantic getaway had become a waking nightmare, and they were the sole, tormented inhabitants. It was time to introduce the ghost. That evening, as they sat in a tense, miserable silence in the living room, I unleashed the house's ultimate terror. I had spent the afternoon preparing it, editing a sound file with a chilling precision. Using the multi-room sound system, I began to play a recorded message I had carefully prepared. It was the voice of our old housekeeper, Lucia, a kind, gentle woman who had worked for my family for 40 years and had passed away 2 years prior. Ottavio had been fond of her, in his own dismissive, patriarchal way. Her voice, with its soft, lilting accent, was an instantly recognizable sound from his past. "This house is watched, Senor Ottavio," the the recording of her voice said, the eerie, disembodied playback whispering from every speaker in the house. It remembers, those who betray the family within its walls do not go unpunished. The effect was electric. Vanessa shrieked, a raw, primal sound of absolute terror, and clutched at Ottavio, who had frozen in his chair, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. The house was no longer just glitching. It was speaking to him in the voice of the dead. Trying to retain some shred of control, they ran through the house, frantically locking doors and shuttering windows. But every lock they turned, every window they secured, I quietly unlocked from my laptop a moment later. A door would creak open in an empty hallway. A window latch would click in the dark. I was omnipresent, invincible, a digital phantom in their collapsing world. That night, they huddled together in the master bedroom, not for comfort, but for shared, terrified warmth. They had barricaded the door with a dresser, a futile, pathetic gesture against an enemy who was already inside the walls. But even there, the house did not rest. I made the lights flicker in a slow, hypnotic pulse. I made a phantom breeze stir the curtains at the closed window. I used a small directional speaker I had hidden in the air vent to whisper a single word over and over, just at the edge of hearing, Eleonora, Eleonora, Eleonora. I could almost feel the silent pulse of their remorse and fear beating through the walls. Their arrogance had been stripped away, layer by layer, until all that was left was the raw, terrified core of their own guilt. I knew that Vanessa was broken. She would leave. But my game was not with her. She was merely a pawn, a necessary instrument in the larger strategy. My target was Ottavio, and his judgment was not yet complete. I spent the rest of the night preparing my final move. I drafted the emails. I arranged the conference call. I contacted my lawyer, and I contacted Ottavio's business partner, Julio, a man I knew to be pragmatic and utterly ruthless when it came to the bottom line. I sent him the file Marcus had prepared, the one detailing Ottavio's embezzlement. The siege was about to end. The final checkmate was at hand. Tomorrow, they would not just face me. They would face the full, comprehensive, and geometrically perfect consequences of their actions. The morning of the 6th day dawned bright and clear, a cruel, mocking beauty that was completely at odds with the toxic, fear-soaked atmosphere inside the main house. I had allowed them a few hours of restless, dream-filled sleep. I wanted them rested for the final act. I wanted them to be fully, lucidly aware as their world came crashing down. At precisely 9 a.m., my plan went into its final, irreversible motion. In the main house, Ottavio and Vanessa were having a frantic, whispered argument. She was packing her bags, her movements jerky and panicked. "I'm leaving, Ottavio, with or without you. I don't care anymore. I'm calling a cab. I'm walking. I'm doing whatever it takes to get out of this house." "And what do you expect me to do?" he hissed. "Just let you walk out? What do I tell Eleonora?" "You should have thought of that before you brought me here," she cried. It was the perfect, pathetic end to their sordid little affair. As they were tearing each other apart, I executed my opening move. With a single command from my laptop, I initiated the Emergency Security Protocol, a feature I had designed myself. Heavy-duty magnetic locks engaged on every door and window in the house. Solid steel security shutters, previously hidden within the walls, rolled down, covering every pane of glass. The house, in a matter of seconds, was transformed from a modern structure of light and air into a seamless, impregnable steel box. They were trapped. The panic inside the house was immediate and absolute. I watched them on the cameras as they threw themselves against the doors, their screams muffled by the soundproofed walls. They were rats in a cage, my cage. Then, the next phase. Every screen in the house, the large television in the living room, the smaller one in the bedroom, their laptops, even their phones, which were still connected to the house's internal network, flickered to life simultaneously. They all displayed the same image, a live video call. It was me. I was not in the guest house. I was in my study, back in our apartment in the city, an image of calm, serene power. I was wearing a crisp, white silk blouse. My hair was perfectly coiffed, and I was holding a delicate porcelain teacup. Beside me, sitting in a matching armchair, was my lawyer, a man known for his surgical precision in high-stakes divorce cases. And on a large screen behind me, patched into the call, was the grim, stony face of Julio, Ottavio's business partner. Ottavio and Vanessa stared at my image on their screens, their faces a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. "Ottavio, Vanessa, I hope you've been enjoying your stay at my house," I began, my voice calm, cool, and utterly devoid of emotion. "I trust the amenities have been to your satisfaction." Ottavio found his voice first. "Eleonora, what is this? What have you done?" "I have simply secured my property," I replied, taking a delicate sip of my tea. A necessary precaution, given the caliber of its current occupant. I set the cup down. I am calling to inform you of a few recent developments. Firstly, as of this morning, all of our joint financial assets have been frozen by court order. Secondly, the papers for our divorce have been filed. My lawyer, who I believe you recognize, has cited adultery with extensive and irrefutable proof. I gestured vaguely at the air. The house, as you may have noticed, is an excellent recording studio, audio and video. It has all been documented. Ottavio's face went white. And that brings me to my third point, I continued, my voice as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. I turned to the screen behind me. Julio, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Julio did not smile. Eleonora. Julio, I have sent you a file detailing Ottavio's rather creative use of the company's expense account over the past year. It seems he has been funding his recreational activities with corporate funds. I believe the total comes to just over $200,000. According to the partnership agreement, I believe this constitutes a material breach of contract and a violation of his fiduciary duties, correct? Julio's eyes, cold and hard, met Ottavio's through the screen. That is correct, Eleonora. The clause regarding moral turpitude and financial malfeasance is quite clear. As of this morning, the board has voted to activate it. Ottavio, you are terminated. Your shares will be bought out at the contractually stipulated penalty rate, which, after we account for the funds you have misappropriated, should leave you with approximately nothing. I had not just destroyed his marriage. I had destroyed his career, his fortune, and his reputation, all in a single, elegant, and perfectly executed maneuver. He was ruined, utterly and completely. I turned my attention back to the screen, showing their horrified faces. The property manager will be there in approximately 2 hours to disable the security protocol and escort you from my property, I said. He will have a taxi waiting for you, Vanessa. Ottavio, you will have to make your own arrangements. I picked up my teacup again. Please leave the keys on the counter, and do try to take out the trash when you leave. I ended the call. The screens went blank, plunging them back into the dim, artificial light of their steel prison. The checkmate was complete. The geometry of my revenge was perfect. The 2 hours I gave them to wait were not an act of mercy. They were the final, exquisite turn of the screw. I did not watch them on the cameras. I didn't need to. I could imagine the scene with a perfect, satisfying clarity. The accusations, the recriminations, the ugly, desperate death throes of their affair. I imagined them pacing their beautiful, high-tech prison, the silence broken only by the sound of their own panicked breathing, and the slow, agonizing realization of the totality of their ruin. They were no longer lovers. They were co-conspirators in a failed coup, each blaming the other for the catastrophic outcome. I spent those 2 hours on the phone with my lawyer, finalizing the details of the divorce. We were filing for an emergency injunction to prevent Ottavio from liquidating any hidden assets. We were preparing a restraining order. I was methodical, precise, my emotions packed away like winter clothes. I was no longer a wife. I was a plaintiff, building an airtight case. At exactly 11 a.m., the property manager, a stoic and reliable man named Mr. Henderson, arrived at the main gate. I disabled the lockdown protocol from my phone, and he made his way to the house. I watched on the cameras as he knocked on the door. Ottavio answered. He looked like a man who had aged a decade in a single morning. His face was gray. His eyes were hollow. The exit was a quiet, humiliating affair. Vanessa, her face hidden behind large sunglasses, scurried into the waiting taxi without a word, her small suitcase her only possession from her brief, disastrous foray into a life of luxury. She was a footnote, a piece of collateral damage in a war that had never been about her. Ottavio was left standing alone in the driveway. He had no car. His company vehicle had already been remotely disabled and scheduled for repossession. He had no money. His cards were all declined. He was a rich man who had become, in the space of a single morning, utterly destitute. He tried to argue with Mr. Henderson, a last, pathetic gasp of his former arrogance. Mr. Henderson, a man not easily impressed, simply pointed down the long driveway. Ottavio, defeated, began the long, lonely walk back to the main road. After they were gone, I drove from the guest house to the main house. The air inside was stale, smelling of fear and expensive perfume. A half-empty bottle of my best champagne sat on the coffee table. A silk scarf, not mine, was draped over a chair. I walked through the rooms, a general surveying a battlefield after a decisive victory. There was no sense of triumph. There was no joy. There was only a cold, quiet, and deeply satisfying sense of order restored. The anomaly had been corrected. The flaw in the design had been removed. I spent the rest of the day with a cleaning crew. We stripped the bed, we washed the linens, we scrubbed every surface until the ghost of them was gone. I opened all the windows, letting the clean, crisp country air blow through the rooms, chasing away the last lingering echoes of their deceit. That evening, I sat alone on the veranda, looking out at the mountains as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The house was silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was not the heavy, oppressive silence of a secret, but the clean, peaceful silence of solitude. My solitude. My phone rang. It was Julio, Ottavio's former partner. "It's done, Eleonora," he said, his voice all business. "He's out. His office is being cleared as we speak. The board sends its gratitude." "There is no need for gratitude, Julio," I said. "I was simply protecting my own interests, and by extension, the interests of the company." "Nevertheless," he said, "if there is anything else you need—" "There is one thing," I said, a new, unexpected idea beginning to form in my mind. The house, my beautiful, intelligent house, had been the instrument of my revenge, but its purpose was not yet complete. I had used it to destroy a life. Now, I would use it to build new one. I looked out at the darkening landscape. The geometry of my revenge had been perfect, but I was beginning to realize that the most elegant equations are not those that end in zero. They are the ones that create something new. The months that followed were a masterclass in legal and financial demolition. The divorce was swift and brutal. With the mountain of evidence I possessed, Ottavio had no leverage, no room to negotiate. He was stripped of his assets, his claims to our shared property nullified by his financial infidelity. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and charmed investors was reduced to living in a rented room, his life a smoking ruin. I never saw him again. I had no desire to. He had ceased to exist for me. Vanessa, I heard, had moved back to her parents' house in a small town upstate. Her brief, dazzling flight into the world of wealth and power had ended in a crash landing. She was a cautionary tale, a subject of gossip for a few weeks, and then she was forgotten. I, however, was not interested in the past. I was interested in the future. The idea that had formed on the veranda that evening had taken root, and it grew into a new, all-consuming project. My revenge was not complete with Ottavio's destruction. That was merely the first half of the equation. The second half would be about creation. I sold our large, opulent apartment in the city. I sold the expensive art, the designer furniture, the trappings of a life I no longer wanted. I moved permanently to the country house, my sanctuary, my fortress, my weapon, and I began to transform it. I contacted a nonprofit organization I had long admired, one that provided support for women and children escaping domestic abuse. I made them a proposal. I would donate the house and the surrounding land to them, and I would fund the construction of a new, purpose-built facility on the property. It would not be a shelter in the traditional sense. It would be a residence, a place of healing, of empowerment, a place where women could come not just to escape, but to rebuild. The project consumed me. I threw myself into it with the same focused, methodical energy I had once dedicated to my legal career, and then to my revenge. I was on site every day, overseeing the construction, working with the architects, a brilliant all-female firm I had hired specifically for the job, and designing the programs that would be offered. We would have legal aid clinics, financial literacy workshops, job training, and art therapy. The main house, the scene of my pain and my triumph, I left largely untouched. It would serve as the administrative center and my own private residence. But the guest house, my former command center, was demolished. In its place, we built a beautiful, light-filled art studio, a place where women could learn to express themselves, to find their voices through color and form. The day the Anna residence opened, named for my mother, a woman of quiet, unyielding strength, was one of the proudest of my life. It was a beautiful, sunny day, and the property was filled with the sounds of children's laughter. Women who had arrived weeks earlier, their faces etched with fear and trauma, were now walking in the gardens, talking, smiling, their shoulders a little less hunched, their eyes a little brighter. I sat on the veranda, the same veranda where I had once watched my husband with his mistress, and I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. My house, which had been designed as an instrument of control, had become an instrument of liberation. The technology that had been my weapon was now used to ensure the safety and security of its new residents. My revenge was complete. It was not just the elegant, geometric destruction of a man who had betrayed me. It was the creation of this place of hope, this sanctuary. Julio, Ottavio's former partner, came to the opening ceremony. He looked around at the new buildings, at the women and children, a look of grudging admiration on his face. "I have to admit, Eleonora," he said, "I never would have expected this. After what he did to you, I expected you to simply destroy him and move on." "I did destroy him, Julio," I said, my voice calm. "But destruction is easy. It is simple arithmetic, subtraction, creation. That is a more elegant geometry." He nodded, finally understanding. A young woman, one of the first residents, came over to me, holding a small, hand-painted watercolor of the mountains. "I made this for you, Judge Eleonora," she said shyly, "to say thank you." I took the painting, my heart full. "You don't have to call me Judge," I said with a smile. "Just Eleonora." I was no longer a wife. I was no longer a judge. I was simply Eleonora, the architect of my own life, a life built not on the shifting sands of another's love, but on the solid foundation of my own strength. The House of Echoes was finally silent, and in its place, a new, more beautiful song was beginning. Thank you very much for watching. Share with those who also like stories. Subscribe and tell me in the comments if you liked my story. Cheers.